Thanks again for joining me today. I'm sitting down with David Belsky. He is a 15-year recruiting industry veteran and founder of FlowerHire, an executive talent firm founded out of LA. This has become the core recruiting firm and talent firm and building block of the cannabis industry. So I'm super excited to, unpack your story. How did you get to where you are today with FlowerHire, your origin story, why cannabis, why recruiting in cannabis, all of that stuff that I'm sure people are trying to figure out and are wondering. So David, thank you so much for sitting down. I really appreciate it.
I'm excited to be here.
So I'm excited that you are here because cannabis is, always relevant, always topical, always hot. Recruiting is a beast in and of itself. Starting a recruiting business is not an easy feat. I know a couple of recruiters, and you're always trying to find the companies and you're trying to find the candidates. So you're sort of marketing on both ends and building the business on both ends. That's not easy. So walk me through your past, as I'm assuming in executive talent and recruiting. And then, well, actually go back before that, actually. Where did you come from? And then what led you to doing what you're doing now?
Well, I'll start from the top.
Yeah, for sure.
I grew up in Austin, Texas, and single parent household. As I was growing up, I was, an athlete, was good at school. And, in high school, I started really, socializing and getting myself out there and kept a good balance of all three until my junior year of high school. Actually ended up getting caught with cannabis at my high school in Austin, Texas. And, Austin, Texas in the late 90s, zero tolerance, so was more or less kicked out of school. Actually moved to Los Angeles before my senior year to live with my dad, and still managed to get into a great college, got into Cornell, played football, and after 4 years at Cornell, didn't really have a lot of white collar connections in my sort of circle. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had a mentor told me to get into sales, and I actually ended up moving back to Los Angeles after college and started to look for sales jobs and found one with a tech recruiting company that, was kind of modeled after the 80s, phone on the shoulder, no computer, started off making $9.50 an hour, basically cold calling, and ended up staying with that company for 13 years. And survived the sort of Great Recession, if you will, of 2009. And after that was more or less running a good portion of operations for that company. And I had the chance to move around the country, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Boston, Chicago, and helped contemporize that company in terms of being able to actually use technology to everyone's advantage, be able to actually hire and onboard millennials. And I got to a point where I was successful yet unfulfilled. 13 years in, I could have kept going, but I had this sort of entrepreneurial itch I wanted to scratch, as I was entering my kind of mid 30s and peak career, and, I'm married and kids. So I wasn't just looking to jump at anything, but around that sort of soul searching time in 2016, I had a couple mentors in California that pivoted into cannabis. And, I was living in Chicago actually at the time. And when I saw that, I was like, what is happening right now? And is this industry really about to go if incredibly sort of talented, successful people are trying to get into it right now? So I flew out there and met with them immediately and picked their brain on the industry, what was happening, and decided that there was a lane for talent in cannabis. And I believed that it would be emerging. I didn't know how big it would be or what it would be, but I felt like I could figure it out. And I was fortunate when I, left kind of the safe place that I had built over 13 years. I had an anchor, which was I had the opportunity to help Ease, which is a very high flying delivery company in California, hire 40 of their first 80 employees. And from that sort of experience, I actually saw other entrepreneurs in cannabis that were all talking about raising capital, hiring people, and the challenges of hiring good people in cannabis. And that was the sort of light bulb moment where, I am in the right place at the right time. And so I formally started FlowerHire a little over 3 years ago, and here we are.
And tell me, I guess, help frame it. Why were people having a hard time finding talent in cannabis? Was it just too new?
Well, there was a stigma, and I think the stigma has actually gone away a lot across the country over the last 3 years. But at the time, it was almost like a disbelief that there were white collar jobs in cannabis, right? That there were, that the industry needed accountants and financial minds and lawyers and marketers, and actually would be able to pay and attract that talent. So, and it was also because of that stigma, because of it being federally illegal. There was thought that you wouldn't be able to attract world-class talent into your organization if you were in cannabis. And so what a lot of the early work that I did was really try to identify the formula for what made for a successful hire in cannabis. And and ease was kind of the petri dish for that. And the formula was somebody needed to believe that they were at the forefront of a major global industry that would become 30, 40, $50 billion industry over the course of the next 10 years, and appreciate that moment in history as a capitalist, right? Somebody also needed to have a relationship with the plant. Like, didn't have to be a hardcore user, but had to believe in its power as medicine, as general wellness, as it shouldn't have been criminalized, as it negatively affected huge portions of disproportionately minority with incarceration, and had to believe on the right side of history, right? Mm-hmm. And then the third thing was you had to have some experience operating without a net, meaning early on, companies wanted the Diageo operations and marketing leader, right? But if that person had never touched a startup, never experienced hypergrowth, never developed the tools necessary to do turnarounds or things like that, coming into cannabis, which was pure hypergrowth and an emerging industry, was just too much. So I looked for people that maybe they had a big company pedigree, but they also had wins that meant rapid acceleration of growth within companies, especially for leadership roles, right? And once I kind of figured out that formula, I started applying that formula to any search, whether again it was an operations leader, a CFO, a general counsel, a head of distribution, to be able to find kind of the right people. And what I found actually surprisingly were that there were a lot of people that wanted to believe in what they were doing again, whether they worked in the tech industry before or whether they were working in an industry that was just in a kind of a slow, steady decline. A lot of folks looked at this as an opportunity to do something different, do something exciting, and also do something they could believe in. They felt would make the world a better place. And that was really the refreshing thing that I learned quickly was, for the right person in this industry, what they did for work actually aligned with what they felt made the world a better place. And when you put intelligent, collaborative, entrepreneurial, creative people in a room solving complex problems, I think really amazing, things can happen.
Okay, so you have two sides to recruiting. You have the side where you find the companies, and then you have the side where you have to find the candidates. Now, if you're dealing with cannabis companies, I was assuming there's not a lot of niche recruiting firms deal with cannabis companies. So I would assume that it's not as hard to fill that pipeline. However, on the flip side, I'm sure there's a lot of candidates that don't even know you exist, or it's hard to find those potential candidates that you just outlined. Like you outlined all those characteristics that you're looking for in a candidate, and part of it is somebody who wants to be more passionate or more evangelical about where they work. So was it correct that it's easier to find the companies and you had a hard time finding the candidates? Or walk me through the landscape of building a recruiting company in cannabis.
Well, I think there's challenges. There were challenges actually on both sides of the funnel, and I'll talk through that. I think that FlowerHire's niche is really, we're the only company of cannabis focusing on strategic six-figure cannabis jobs that only does cannabis, right? We don't do hourly workers. We don't have a business that is in another industry that we're trying to apply infrastructure to this emerging industry. So we're beholden to some other revenue stream. We're trying to create value in the lane that we're operating in, right? So I think that's given us flexibility to really build something the right way for this industry. But on the client side, you correctly identified both sides of the funnel, right? Because at the end of the day, both sides of the funnel are our clients. Companies are the pay for our services. Candidates are the one that we help make life decisions of if this is the right industry for you. On the company side, I think I just timed the market a little early. Like into 2017, there weren't a lot of companies that had capital that were really in growth mode yet. I think that it took until about Q2 of 2018 for the kind of the peak of the kind of boom in the Canadian financial markets to really start taking shape, and for investment space to come into the plant touching world in mass, right? So at first it was finding companies that had the capital to not only afford talent, but also afford a premium service to find that talent, right? So in that kind of gap period, late 2017, early 2018, we did a lot of work with ancillary companies, ancillary technology companies. Like Ease technically at that point was an ancillary technology company because they just got funding first. It was easier for traditional VC to invest in a tech company in an emerging industry versus investing in a dispensary operator, right? But that ended up normalizing it by the middle of 2018, and we've seen kind of client-side demand grow at very steady since for the last 2+ years. On the candidate side, there was never a lack of interest in cannabis, but interest did not equate to that person being the right fit for cannabis, right? So a lot of what we do at FlowerHire that's specific to cannabis is we put a premium on the education, talking to candidates about what it's like to work in the industry, like the good parts, again, talented, creative people solving complex problems, doing something they believe in, with the realities of it. It's the industry doesn't stop. It is a 24/7 industry. You're probably going to make less money. If you're looking for stability, this isn't the place for you, and talking about why that is, and as well as educating on the specific companies that we're working with that are trying to fill jobs, what they do, what their business models are. So, filtering through candidate side interest in a more prescriptive way was the challenge. But there was never a lack of people interested in the industry, fortunately, right? And at the same time, that didn't mean that they had the right experience to pull from for the space. So, the filtering process was really kind of the real heavy lifting, and kind of the proprietary, secret sauce IP, if you will, around how we were able to take and synthesize the company's requirements. And often they didn't have a written job description, and really help them define what they were looking for, take that back to the candidate filtering process, and show them like 1, 2, 3 people that they could hire one of them because they're actually good for what they're looking for, right?
Why did you ever choose to start this business, man? This seems like it seems very tough. It seems like a very, very tough business to be successful at long term.
Well, part of for me in my previous life, supporting, fast growing technology companies with engineering and executive placement, it just got to a point where it was kind of thankless. It was definitely something you could do well and it'd be lucrative, but I liked going into work for the people that I worked with, but I didn't necessarily like what I was doing. Yeah. Right. And
you mentioned
recruiting is a very kind of, it's a very block and tackle thing. It's not a sexy business, right? Now it could be a high margin business. It could be a very successful business. But if done well, it's definitely done intelligently, thoughtfully, and more kind of scientifically. But the science of a third-party recruiting firm is block and tackle and consistency, right? So I looked at this industry as something like, I believe that the cannabis industry needed the right people in it to be successful. I believe that the people that I was going to be able to put into this industry were going to be mavericks and pioneers, defining what their skill set was going to be in this world, like how an HR leader in cannabis actually could do their job well, how a financial controller in cannabis would actually do their job well. So putting people into this industry that understood like the opportunity, not only for the industry as a whole, but opportunity for themselves personally to bring value to a company in a way that never been done before, and really set that stage was something that was really compelling for me. Despite the risk, and I took a bet on myself that, I would work hard. There was no doubt there. And then I could figure it out. So I put all my chips into it and needed to make it happen,
Yeah. And it's obviously paid off. And now the industry has evolved to some extent compared to and contrasted to when you first started.
Oh, yeah.
So like, let's look at the industry then, and let's look at the industry now, and how has that affected your business?
Well, I mean, I think we could look at it in a bunch of different ways. I think obviously for a while the sort of bubble in the Canadian financial markets drove a lot of buzz and interest and capital, not only in Canada but also in the U.S. markets, right? And that led to a lot of investment dollars, similar to what you see in emerging industries, where there's not really a good thesis for how that dollar is going to unlock value. It's just, we got to get our money in because this is going to be big, right? So, in 2018, specifically on the West Coast, what I saw were that companies were raising capital that had like experienced entrepreneurs that had wins in other industries, that were marrying themselves and their experience with people of cannabis that knew how to make high quality products, and they're getting money at high valuations. And investors weren't asking about how they were going to run a profitable business. They're just saying, go build your brand, go build infrastructure. And what happened in 2019, when the decline in the sort of the Canadian capital market started happening, is that even for private company investors, they started looking at operators in the space being like, how are you going to be profitable? And the switch happened overnight, right? So for some companies that had very lofty, ambitious goals and no way to really get to profitability, their business may never recover from that switch, right? But what it forced operators to do, which I think long term brings a ton of value to cannabis, is it forced operators to figure out, okay, let's not do everything. Let's focus on what we're good at and how we can actually make money and run a profitable business in cannabis, which has its own challenges. And the companies that were able to take that change in investor sentiment and figure out what they were good at are actually doing extremely well right now, right? So I also, when I started, we were really focusing on some of the more established markets, California, Oregon, Colorado. And what I've seen over the past year and a half is there's been almost like in the US at least, a balance of power shift, as the Massachusetts market has gotten more traction in the recreational, as Michigan and Illinois have come online. Now you see a lot more investment in new infrastructure and even investment dollars, not necessarily going to California, but going to other emerging markets that maybe have more of a limited licensing scheme. That might have more of a friendly climate in which you can actually run a profitable business, whether it's a medical or a recreational market. So I think again, the balance of power has shifted from the West Coast to the East Coast and the Midwest in the U.S. cannabis markets, just in terms of if you're an investor looking for a return, as well as general job growth, right? I mean, you're looking at facilities opening up for the first time in areas that you have customers as soon as you open, because they never had it before, and they'd love to have a traditional retail experience for buying their cannabis, right? So just new construction, more licenses being issued alone is leading to tremendous, I think, growth from an employment standpoint, and also for the industry. And that growth is happening when an industry also understands a little bit more about the boundaries for how do you maintain profitability in an industry as challenging as this.
Do you find that the industry has matured to the point where it's somebody who's looking to get into the industry may not have to worry about lack of stability, or perhaps having, like you mentioned before, you're not going to have premium pay scale in contrast to other industries? Has it changed, and now it's just more normalized, where if somebody going to cannabis, they don't expect these things anymore?
I don't think it's definitely not where the rest of the world is yet. There are some companies that are a little bit more established, like your Crescos and your Curaleafs and your TerraSens of the world, that do offer things like 401k plans and some kind of fringe benefits you'd expect in other industries. But still, for the most part, compensation is, when people change jobs, well, obviously COVID is different, but when people change jobs before COVID, normal is you expect a raise. It's a tight employment market, right? That's still not necessarily happening in cannabis. What is interesting now is that a year and a half ago, it was not possible to hire a lawyer that had cannabis experience, or an accountant that had cannabis experience, or a classically trained sort of CPG manufacturing or food manufacturing person that had cannabis experience. But now you can. So there's a lot of people that were their first mover pioneer types into the industry that are now looking for their kind of second cannabis job, if you will. And those folks are getting raises, you know. So I think stability, I mean, I think that some of the larger, best named operators in the space have had the most public financial troubles, right? So again, I don't think it's necessarily still stable, but maybe in the grand scheme of things and how the world of work in general is being turned upside down. And there were these major kind of shifts that were happening, with preferences towards delivery and moving away from traditional retail. Maybe cannabis is comparatively more stable than other industries now, for sure, because, no one knows what the world of work looks like.
No, I think everyone's all turned on their head right now. Unemployment is at an all-time high, right?
So in that way, cannabis almost looks less risky because it's just going to get bigger because more states and are going to open up more and issue more licenses and more facilities are going to open up. And that's been an interesting shift. COVID has been an awful thing for a lot of people, so it's not a positive thing whatsoever, but it has, in a sense, probably been positive for the cannabis industry specifically because it was allowed to remain open. And because of that, it's now entered into a more of a national kind of narrative about a search for tax revenue and jobs.
Mm-hmm. And one more point for somebody who is looking to get into cannabis. Actually, a few more things. This is very interesting to me because I want to understand somebody going to an emerging market. Emerging market. I put that in air quotes because it's not so new anymore. But still, what would a red flag be for somebody who wants to get into cannabis in terms of a company they should work for or not work for?
I think that in general, there's been a lot of hardworking people that have been able to pull things off in other industries they haven't been able to pull off here. So I would look and make sure that they actually have money in the bank. They're not waiting for investors because, we have money coming in soon means we never get money or we get money in a year, right? Making sure they actually have licenses granted to them because the application process is not a sure thing in any state. So the first thing to kind of look at as you're looking at the industry is, do they have the capital they need to complete their construction and build out and have some runway? And do they actually have the licenses they think they're going to get already? And if they don't have those licenses now, there's a chance they may never get them, right? And so it's just something to be cognizant of.
And once they get those licenses and they have the funding, okay, that's fine. Now I want to get into the industry. I want to work with a firm like FlowerHire. Is there competition? Are there other people that are cannabis specific recruiting firms? Is there things you should stay away from when you work with a recruiting firm?
There definitely are. And let me just make another point here about getting into cannabis. Like, as society, at least in the U.S. and I know in Canada as well, we're very programmed to look at career ladders in a hierarchical way. I start off my career, I'm an associate, I'm an analyst, I become a supervisor or a manager, maybe I become a director or a VP. That director job isn't going to be available at my company because my boss isn't leaving. Maybe I should go work somewhere else to get that director job. That's how we're programmed to look at career. Cannabis is not yet linear, right?
Okay.
Both people with a management title in cannabis are doing executive level responsibilities because there's just no one else there. So I think for now, my advice is if you're getting into the industry, just try to land in whatever lane you are from a skill set perspective and believe in the next 2 to 3 to 4 years, the whole industry is going to normalize and being a first mover will make up for itself in future title and responsibility. You can't look at this industry as I deserve a certain title. Right. And I think that's a hard thing for people to get their head around when they start looking at working in the space. Right. You have to be able to drop the ego and realize you got to learn a whole new bag of tricks to work in this industry. But there's a lot you'll be able to apply from what you've done before. But you got to be ready that you're going to have to figure out new ways to solve problems. Mm-hmm. And as it relates to the competitive landscape for us, I think there's a lot of other firms that are hardworking recruiting and staffing firms focusing on cannabis. Again, I think many of them are pivoting to more of the hourly niche, right? Okay. And because you look at you need hourly workers to work at retail, cultivation, and processing. And a lot of those firms are doing more of like a contractor model or like a freelance or gig type worker model, which I don't think actually works really well in cannabis. I can talk more about that.
Yeah, sure. I love to hear that, because that's gig economy is big too, right? I didn't realize that intersected with cannabis. I didn't understand that. So
if you think about like freelance, seasonal work, like for most cannabis companies, like it's hard to really, they don't have the data yet to really forecast, okay, we're going to need to hire somebody and we'll have work for them for the next 12 months no matter what, right? So whether they have plants that are being harvested that they need people to make sellable, like trim them and put them into packaging, or they have a big production run for manufactured items, like edibles, but they don't necessarily aren't consistently manufacturing, or even at the retail level when they're expecting some surges during around certain holidays, certain weekends. So there are some firms that have set up like an hourly kind of bench workforce to go and for companies in space to call. I personally think it's hard to see a model where you can be profitable as a recruitment firm doing that, because the level of insurance that you need to carry on those type of workers as a third-party agency is much higher than even if it was a normal manufacturing job, right, or normal retail job. So we've stayed very focused in the niche of like strategic C-level positions and six-figure kind of salaried jobs. That being said, we've built relationships with some of the marquee operators around the country, and there is still a huge pain point for companies as it relates to hiring hourly workers. Like if you're going to if you're going to open a dispensary in, let's just say, Detroit, Michigan, you probably need to hire 30 on the low end, maybe 50 people right off the bat. How do and we're talking, 90% of those being, hourly kind of retail associate, bud tender type folks. What do you do if you're a company? You all you can really do is post a job on Indeed, right? Yeah. What do you get when you post a job on Indeed? You get 1,000 applicants, right? So for most cannabis companies are somewhat understaffed in their HR and talent lane. So what ends up happening is the assistant general manager for that dispensary gets 1,000 Indeed resumes. And they look at probably the first 20 or 30, open them up, look for who lives local and seems relevant on paper, and starts there. There's no filtering process. So one of the things that FlowerHire and kind of our next journey is, we're partnering up with a group that has built kind of HR tech software platforms where we're actually going to create an intelligent matching software to connect people with the right jobs in cannabis. Because at the end of the day, a lot of people don't know, would I like being a bud tender? Would I like working in a cultivation? Would I like being a B2C delivery driver, giving people cannabis? I don't know. So if we can put some IP behind that filtering and take that 1,000 resume response rate to a retail job and whittle it down to the best 30 that they should talk to, A, the hiring is going to be more prescriptive. B, it'll have an effect on turnover that's positive. And C, it'll be a huge value add in terms of the efficiency of the hiring process, because at the end of the day, most of the hourly positions turn over 2.5, 3 times a year as well. So you're in this constant state of hiring for those roles, right? And there's not a lot of insight on how to do it well, right? And so I think technology is the right thing to solve kind of the hiring of hourly workers, right? So if I could take that kind of secret sauce learned from vetting people in this industry and explaining it, and apply that with some behavioral scientists into an intelligent matching and filtering process, that's something that we're working on, and we're hoping to launch here by the end of the year with the largest cannabis careers event in the history of the world after the election in the middle of November here. So more coming on that. But
No, I appreciate it. And it's also fun because literally everything you're doing is bleeding edge. It's cutting edge in the industry, right? Like that's what's fun about it. So you launch some tech, and that's going to pave the way for, like you mentioned, it's truly changing the entire cannabis industry, the way you launch these products or this IP or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, and it's exciting. And I think that we've done hundreds of placements in the cannabis industry over the last 3 years, average salary into the mid 100s. We've done dozens of C-level placements across the country. And that's a very kind of like white glove, hands-on service, right? But at the same time, those are the people that are making these decisions as well internally for companies around how do they continue to evolve and become more efficient. So, what's really interesting as FlowerHire is we're connective tissue. Like we actually know what different operators are doing, even in the same state, that don't really know what each other are doing because no one talks about it. And because of that, even though we're started in California and I'm based in California, half our team is not in California and on the East Coast, but we're able to take the lessons that have been learned from how talent and the type of talent is able to succeed from a strategic standpoint in companies, and able to succeed in solving the problems of this industry, and take that kind of formula and apply it to different states, and find that kind of homegrown, Massachusetts, person for a company in Massachusetts, just based on, the experience, out west.
No, very, very interesting. I do want to ask a couple like life insight questions, but before I pivot, I just wanted to make sure with what you're working on with FlowerHire, we went over like the cannabis industry, state of the industry, evolution of the industry, the process, your story, the tech that you're rolling out, future plans. Was there anything that we didn't touch on that's relevant to cannabis or FlowerHire that you wanted to, that's like on top of mind right now?
I think we've covered a lot of it. I think at the end of the day, our goal is to continue to provide education and awareness and just content of what it's like to work in this industry, because this industry needs to hire potentially 1 million people in the next 5 or 6 years. That's a lot of people, right? And there's no insight and information of what it's like to work in the industry. So we try to put on webinars that talk about different roles in the industry, and we're going to be launching our kind of website, careersincannabis.com, which will be an education and content destination where you can actually see what type of job in cannabis you would enjoy and would be right for you, right? So that's coming. So we aim to just bring, I guess we're trying to find what is professional cannabis and really and own that lane, right? It's not professional tech, it's not professional beverage, it's professional cannabis. The era of taking pictures of purple nugs, it's great for some audience, some customers, but it's not for the majority of what is our currently customers, right? And so how do you blend like some stale corporate, career recruitment, vision with the legacy cannabis and find that like modern contemporary workforce for cannabis? We're trying to kind of solve and bring value to bringing more clarity in that lane.
As this industry evolves, I think it's very important that we, that you do have like thought leaders and groups that provide that insight and education, because it's a little bit more than just a career in, for example, like AI or a career in robotics. It's because there's not only a new opportunity and a new industry that's evolving, but you're also fighting stigma at the same time, right? AI doesn't really have much of a stigma, except maybe perhaps like self-driving cars and ethics and stuff like that. But outside of that, does not have the same type of stigma that cannabis has, that you have to sort of overcome. And I've spoken to other people that have cannabis stigmas, and a lot of it is about not cannabis stigma, excuse me. People that run companies are trying to combat stigma in their industry in cannabis, and it's all about education. That's really what it's all about.
And there's something to be said about, if you're going to work in this industry, no matter how successful you've been and what your wins are and how intelligent you are, you're going to meet somebody that went to jail for this plant, lost their life savings because of the plant, and you got to be able to bend the knee and appreciate that person, and because of that, it's such a different workplace than almost anything else in terms of like how complex it really is. As a industry, it's really an industry of industries, right? And there's nothing quite like it.
Yeah, no, very well said. Okay, some rapid fire insight questions, just to, because your experience and what you sort of overcome as an entrepreneur. building out FlowerHire, what was your largest challenge and how did you overcome it?
I think it was just dealing with the idea that as soon as I started this was actually 2 weeks after the birth of my fourth child.
Oh.
And being able to I ended up moving up my family across the country to start a business in a brand new emerging industry that was still stigmatized. And so that was a big life adjustment and upheaval. And just being able to, continue to stay sane during that time period in order to make sure that the work that was being done early was really going to be something I could grow off of. That was a big challenge. The other thing is this industry is so quirky and complex and hard just to operate in, whether you pay way too much taxes, whether the states are challenging to deal with, whether the sophistication of different people you're dealing with from the supply chain and the retail side just isn't quite there. That, when you're working and partnering with entrepreneurs and executives that are actually running companies, just understanding how challenging their world is and being able to be that sounding board for them and actually bring value to where they're at. That's been both the challenge and the biggest reward, and something that I wasn't finding in sort of the tech industry is just once you're a service provider to this industry that actually follows through with what you say you're going to do and is a value add, the level of camaraderie you have with your clients from actually being able to help them is it's special, and it really is consultative. And by being consultative, the fact that we charge a premium fee for our service, companies are happy to pay it, right? And it took some time to really understand how this one was different. I was able to take very kind of formulaic best practices of how to do recruiting learned over years and be able to then figure out how to marry that with the realities of this industry. And in this industry, I was I just don't want to waste my fucking client's time. The hardest job that mankind has ever conceived is being the CEO of a cannabis company right now. I want to give them what they actually need. And it wasn't about throwing things against the wall. It was really about being prescriptive about not only the diagnosis, but the fit proposition.
Very, very smart. And well done. Where do you go to learn and stay on top of cannabis, the industry trends?
Well, I'm fortunate that I have a team of now 11 people that is talking to people in this industry all the time. And so just from word of mouth, we do really get some interesting insights and intel on what's actually happening behind the scenes. That being said, I subscribe to probably a dozen different newsletters and things of that nature. And I listen to podcasts like this, but where they feature different entrepreneurs in the space just to hear their story, right? Whether it's thinking outside the bud or investing in cannabis, but you have to stay informed, right? Part of what I do for my team is I create an environment and a platform in one of our we'll call it our Slack channel, even though we use Telegram because I like it better, where we just constantly share information and news that we're learning about the market, because I think it's important for everybody here to really be an expert, because they're people we're talking to, especially on the candidate side, they look at us as experts anyway. We have to know our stuff, right? So it's just something you have to stay on top of. And I think that also ties back to, if you're working in this industry, you can't rely on anyone else to teach you this industry. You got to go out there and find it, figure it out yourself, read the regs, for whatever state you're in to really understand it. So we try to live that sort of need for education internally, for sure.
In the world of cannabis, what's new that people may not know about that you're researching or that you're interested in right now?
I think that people may not know how different these different states are. As an example, in a Michigan, there's 500 retail stores. In Illinois, there's still only 90, and they're both recreational markets that opened up around the same time. There's every state has its own little quirks and little differences and nuances, and I think that that's obviously challenging if you're a larger multi-state operator to be able to figure that out, but also realize that what's going on in your state is going to be completely different than the state next door if there's cannabis activity, right? In terms of how the regulatory landscape is shaped up. And that's, you think that like states would learn from other states and what they've done and what worked and what hasn't worked, but it's not. It's just not. It's not the case, right? It's a patchwork quilt of things that often make no sense, and
Yeah, no, it is what it is, man. It is what it is. That's just the way. So it again brings you back to like the constant learning.
Yeah, uncovering that truth on the ground in different markets is really what we put a focus on.
Somebody wants to get into cannabis. You mentioned a few things. What would be the main thing that you would want to tell them?
I tell them it is not just a job. It's really gonna, if you're the right person for cannabis, because it's gonna be work that you love doing and it's never gonna cease. It's gonna change the relationship you have with other things in your life, with your family, your friends, and it's gonna change, kind of the balance that you found. And be prepared for that. And I think also be prepared to constantly have to pivot. And even if you're an experienced executive level person, you're gonna have to be massively tactical and massively strategic at the same time, right? There's just no one else to get the things done that needs to get done. And so some people excel in that. And the goal is obviously to build out infrastructure and personnel and teams and move up, right? But when you join, and really to learn this industry effectively, you have to be tactical. You have to really understand what the whole experience is like in the eyes of your customers, of your employees, what it's like to work in a grow. Like, you really have to immerse yourself so you can really understand how to apply your experience and your instincts to the space.
Mm-hmm. And as an entrepreneur, and a career-long professional, a lesson that you tell your younger self, after you've gone through career and now entrepreneurship, building your own business, switching industries, what would you tell your younger self?
I'd say when it's the hardest, that means the most success is right around the corner. Just have faith and keep going. And because I think that's very true. I think that if you're looking at the career ladder, when you're struggling the most, whether it's from a stress or whether it's from an uncertainty or whether it's some real challenges as a business person or running a business, getting through that and getting to the other side of that gives you immense confidence, perspective, and ultimately the whatever level of success that you've never achieved before. Is being able to constantly go through adversity. And that's how you learn, that's how you grow, that's how you evolve. And that's what, kind of separates, I think, a lot of people that are successful as entrepreneurs versus not. Yeah,
no, I like that. It's a good lesson. And then the last question, and then I'll get some socials and websites from you. What does success mean to you?
I mean, success, our goal is to be the number one talent platform for the cannabis industry. I like to think that there's a unique generational opportunity to do so right now. I'd like FlowerHire to be, a fixture, an institution of the space, in perpetuity. I ideally won't be running it in 10 years, but I'd like for it to be around and be a big part of the overall story of the space, and help to build, a sort of conscious and relevant cannabis industry early, getting the right folks involved and making sure that the operators that are going to, have the right assets and have the right attitude are going to get the right people on board to succeed and drive this industry forward.
And for you personally, what does success look like in terms of your end product, your fulfillment in life and career?
I mean, at this point, I've been on, we'll just say a fairly transactional hamster wheel for the last 16 plus years of my life, and 5-10 years, I'd like to just focus on being more strategic and controlling my time more, and enjoying that kind of the teenage years of my kids. That's the goal, right? But every day, it gets closer to that goal, right? That's what I think. That's what we're all kind of working towards, in a sense too.
The freedom, yeah. Okay. Most important question. People want to go check out FlowerHire. People want to connect with you, social, all the websites, socials, all that.
So FlowerHire.com is very simple. There's lots of different forms for getting in touch on FlowerHire.com. If you go to FlowerHire.com/blog, there's a lot of the content that we've put out there, articles, interviews. I think that you can go to YouTube and look for Sunset Session. It's a series that we do with our partners at Razzle, where we put on, video interviews of, entrepreneurs within the space. You can follow FlowerHire on Instagram. It's @FlowerHire. You can follow our posts on LinkedIn. And if you want to get in touch with me personally, David @flowerhire.com.